afternoon from the East Coast of the U.S., or good morning and good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. I'm Julie Cohen, and this is Work Life Leader Live. Thank you for being here. So we're going to get started. In a minute, I'm going to introduce our wonderful guest. But before I do that, I want to just remind you what Work Life Leader Live is. This is an opportunity for you to listen and engage with me, Julie Cohen, who I'm the CEO of Work Life Leader. I'm an executive coach, and our organization is a training development and leadership development organization. And the guests we have to talk about things related to work, leadership, and the intersection of life where these all meet. So with that, I want to introduce our guest, Jane Finkle. Hi, Jane.
Hi, great to be here, Julie.
Thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about Jane before we start our discussion. So Jane is a career coach, speaker, and author of the Introvert's Complete Career Guide, From Landing a Job to Surviving, Thriving, and Moving On Up. She has successfully helped clients to envision and achieve careers that are fulfilling and personally enriching. Previously, Jane served as Associate Director of Career Services at the University of Pennsylvania. She has been published all over the place in the Business Insider, Huffington Post, Inc., Psychology Today, Talent Development, and Mind, Body, Green, to name a few. So she is also a guest on national radio and podcast shows. So we're very honored that she decided to come and talk to me.
Oh, great. It's great to be here, Julie.
So Jane, I always like to share, ask people to share a little unknown fact, but I'm going to prompt you. Do you want to tell people how we know each other?
Well, Julie and I worked together at the University of Pennsylvania, and Julie was actually my work studies student. And it's such a wonderful transformation that we're now colleagues and we kind of know each other as friends. So that's very special.
Well, and just so you know, Jane was like a year older than me, as I was her work study, and she was, an employee, and we've been friends for a long time. So it's kind of a fun fact that we both had roots at the University of Pennsylvania Career Services office. So with that, let's get to our topic. As you can see, the title of today's conversation is Introvert Power, Quiet Leadership in Action. But before, again, I have a lot of questions for Jane, and we're going to talk about introversion and leadership, introversion and career effectiveness from a perspective of an introvert, as well as from the perspective of people who work with introverts or manage introverts or want to develop introverts as leaders. But before we do that, if you're here watching, which I can see there's some folks here, please say hello, regardless what platform you're on, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. Put in the chat box that you're here, say hi. Use hashtag live if you're actually watching this now, which is Wednesday, November 18th at 4 p.m.-ish in the afternoon on the East Coast. So if you can, wherever you're watching, if you can do that translation, we'd love to know you're here. So just put live and hello in a chat box, and we can acknowledge you. And we are going to be asking for questions. We want your questions, your comments, your thoughts throughout. And we really want this conversation to go in the direction that people watching this want to hear. So the reason this topic, I think is really important is there's some stereotypical ways people think of leaders, that they think a leader looks one certain way. And often it's someone who is out there, who is comfortable talking loud or pounding a table or interrupting and things like that. And we know that is a myth. So as someone who works with leaders, I see, leaders that come in all shapes and sizes. And I think sometimes introverts or what are called introverts, which Jane is going to shortly tell us about this, I think sometimes they may get a bad rap as they're not effective leaders. So I'm excited that, we're going to talk about the power and the magic and the strengths of introverts today. So with that, Jane, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Well, I don't think it comes to a surprise to people who know me really well that obviously, and I've written about it, that I do lean towards introvert. So, and I'm a proud introvert. And I do think sometimes people are surprised because we think of extroverts as the social butterflies and introverts as maybe not wallflowers, but more withdrawn. And it can be that way in the extreme, but in general, it's really about our energy.
Right.
And extroverts, their energy tends to expand when there's lots of opportunity to interact with people, activity. It doesn't mean they don't like to be alone, but it really is a very energizing experience for them.
Right, right.
Introverts like people and they like activity, and many of them have very good social skills, but they need more time to be alone because that process of reflection and thinking about things carefully is energizing for them.
Yeah, yeah, great. So we have a bunch of people here already. So thank you, everyone. Irene, Linda, Janine, Bill, and Deb. I'd love to see, for those of you who are watching, let us know if you identify as an introvert. So just put in this in a comment, whether you identify as an introvert, an extrovert, or some combination of both. For those people who know me, it also won't come as a surprise that I am a high extrovert. And yeah, I definitely like to be out there. I get energized by being around a lot of people. When I come home after a party, I have to walk around and let my energy go. And yet there are, times usually when I'm really tired that, all I want to do is kind of cocoon and not be around people. So there's definitely, I think I have some introversion tendencies, but yeah, I'm a high extrovert. So why don't we just get started? Tell me and tell us, why did you write this book? So tell us a little bit about the book and what was your catalyst for writing it?
Well, I think that when people write a book, there's something about their personal experience or the work that they've done with clients that, has made an impression or is really special to them. So my experience was that at a certain point in my career, I felt as if my introversion was holding me back. So the story I always tell, because it's really pivotal, is that after I finished my graduate studies at the University of Rochester, I got this job at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was so excited. It was like a new adventure for me. And I got there, and I had worked in very small offices, maybe 3 counselors and a director. This was like, I don't know, it felt like 50 people, but it was about 20 or 25 maybe. And every Friday they would have this staff meeting, and everybody was talking and interrupting. And I didn't know how to get a word in edgewise. And I started to freeze up. I was almost immobilized. And so I felt like, oh my goodness, I'm failing. So what happened is there was an opportunity to move to another area of the office. And I thought, well, maybe that'll help. And I talked with the director and she said, oh, that sounds fine, but you'll need to go through an interview. And I thought, well, fine, that's okay. Then she came back the next day and she said, oh, you don't need to interview you. Your new boss thinks you're great. So the reason that was so pivotal is because I realized there were parts of my introversion that were really very positive. So I think what was and I've been told by other people that, the calmness, the reservedness was actually made people comfortable. And also something that's been said to me, which I really like, is that I handle things with grace. And I think that sort of quiet, reflective pieces are part of, my introversion.
Right.
So obviously that boosted my confidence, but it didn't solve the problem. So through osmosis and through taking some risks, I learned how to prepare in advance and, learn to speak up and initiate more. But because it had taken me time, I didn't want other people who are introverted to suffer the same struggle. So that, I wrote that book because I wanted to speak out for introverts, but more important, I wanted to help them speak out for themselves. Right. So we know that the American culture is really leans towards extroversion. You're rewarded for speaking up and taking initiative. If you look at the ads on TV, everybody's in groups, they're riding bicycles together. You don't see a lot of ads where people just kind of sit really quiet. So, and it's no different in the workplace. So it's very important for introverts to embrace that introversion, but they absolutely have to sprinkle in extroverted skills or they'll never succeed in the workplace.
Great. Okay, so we got some comments. So so thank you for that, Jane. And again, we do love questions, comments for Jane. We're going to be getting onto more specific topics, but definitely have some folks here. Bill Hyman is a slight extrovert. Lynn Carroll says, I'm an introvert who was often mistaken for an extrovert. I enjoy talking with people. You can see what she wrote here, but they don't see how drained I am after social interactions. And she has hashtag naps, which is great. So we have another extrovert here, and then a few other folks. Let's see. Oh, interesting. So here Debbie Becker talks about definitely an introvert for better or worse, but I've come to accept this description and acknowledge how it has shaped me in all aspects of life. Again, it seems like we have a lot of introverts here today, although we have one extrovert here, and her comment is, I miss groups. Irene, I hear you. I miss groups and lunches out and, bumping into people.
Well, let me say something about that, because a lot of people think that introverts have just adjusted beautifully to this COVID and, working alone. But the truth is we all yearn for human contact and for interaction. So they may have adjusted a little quicker, but, I hear my introverted friends complain about not being with friends or actually being on Zoom and still dealing with the interruptions, but you don't see people's profiles and their body language. So
yeah.
So I miss groups too.
Yeah. And I think this is important around any type of categories that we put people in. It's important that we know that we have styles, we have preferences, and we adapt. We can adapt to be highly effective in all environments when we understand and have tools and resources to do so. And I think it's also important to understand when you don't have to adapt. And when you don't have to be someone else. And so that's actually something I do want to talk about, is sometimes introverts think they need to be extroverted. They need to be a certain way in the workplace. So can you talk about that? Maybe some advice when, well, actually, let me tell you a story and then you can respond to it, because I'm sure you have some really specific examples like this. I had a client who came to me, very traditional introvert, and he got a performance review, and he'd been highly effective in his role, but he had a new boss. And after about 6 months, the performance review, that boss said to him, you need to be edgier. You need to be out there more. And so he hired me with the intention that, and he worked in sales, and he was extremely successful in sales because he was a relationship builder, and he really focused on one-on-one engagement, and he loved building relationships. So he was very concerned that he wasn't going to, get the next promotion, or his boss would think his way wasn't, the best way to sell. And so initially he said, well, I want to talk out, I want to speak out 4 times in every meeting. I want to do this. He had this list of goals. And after a few coaching sessions, we realized he needed to reframe the narrative. And instead of being what his boss thought he needed to be, he needed to show the boss his strengths. And he eventually started to, quote unquote, own his introversion and really focus on the strengths. And then, eventually he was able to prove to his boss. And he actually had to assert himself, not in the way his boss wanted to, but actually to explain to his boss about what success looks like and how it has worked for him over the years. So, do you see that often, Jane?
All the time. So mostly when clients come in and they admit, terrible to say, they admit they're introverted as if there's something wrong with it. I kind of shift the conversation about what's really great about introversion. So introverts are really good at listening, and they're keen observers. So they think before they speak up. So, and this is not an insult to extroverts, but just because you talk a lot doesn't mean you have good ideas. So there is some value in just taking time to think things through, which they do very naturally. The other thing is that, they tend to be a little modest and reserved, which sometimes makes people uncomfortable, but it also, it makes them diplomatic. They're very careful about how they approach people. And, sometimes I think that can be very valuable, especially in groups. They also tend to have, and Bill Gates talks about this, he's obviously very successful and very open about being introvert. And he talks about the introvert's ability for deep concentration. Because, they like to be alone. So give them a problem. And he said they'll go to all sorts of sources, they'll think it through, and they might come up with a really innovative or interesting approach. And they've done some research. Harvard did some research, and they found that introverts have more gray matter, thick gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. It doesn't mean that extroverts don't use that process. It just means that, and that gray matter is related to abstract thinking and decision making. So again, it doesn't mean that extroverts aren't good at those things. It just means that introverts, that's a more active process that's going on inside.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is they do tend to be a little bit more sensitive. And it may be because they have been left out or they overthink things. And I think we could use more compassion in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I think also because they value solitude, how do you think the most important creations, come through? Usually you have to be quiet to think of something, new and different or innovative. So.
Right. Great. Okay. So
in answer to your question, I work on embracing that.
Right.
And I don't want them to change their personality. But then I have to shift a little bit to the other side to help them develop the skills. They're a little bit more extroverted. So that's why I always say it's about embracing your introversion and sprinkling in, the extroverted skills.
Right. And I use the analogy of using different muscles. You don't have to diminish what your natural tendencies are and what you bring to the table. In different situations, you may need to adapt and just have a few other tools in your toolkit without diminishing who you are authentically. So a couple comments. So Janine Pratt says, I make a good boss because I let my staff share their perspectives and take on lead work without feeling threatened. So I can speak to that very concretely because Janine Pratt was my boss a very long time ago, my first boss out of college. So this is like a trip down memory lane for me. It's great to see everyone here. I'd love to talk more about that in that, introverts in leadership roles and why they're great at it and maybe some of the challenges introverts might face. And I'd like to hear comments from folks. I see we do have a lot of introverts here who are in professional roles. What have been some of your successes and your challenges in a leadership role, managing people or managing projects? I'd love to hear that. Put those in the comments and we'll share them and get Jane's thoughts. So thoughts on Janine's comment here, Jane?
Well, I think I've had other introverts who are leaders talk about feeling exhausted if they have to lead a staff meeting. They think they have to talk a lot and they don't want to do that. And I think what Janine's talking about, giving everybody a chance to share their perspective and not worry so much that you have to do a lot of talking. In fact, President Obama, when he had cabinet meetings, he didn't talk first. He would have everyone go around and give an update. And then he had time to listen and think through, what people were saying.
Right.
So, I think what Janine is saying about let them talk, let them, process and talk, and you can, be behind the scenes, which is comfortable for introverts, and then obviously, give them some feedback.
Super. So how do introverted managers, what do they need to do, or do they need to do anything different when they're managing extroverts?
Well, I think that what works well, we're all focused on diversity now. And so it makes a work team more dynamic when you have a balance of introvert and extrovert energy. So I think if an extrovert can acknowledge some of that introverted energy and incorporate it in the way they lead. So examples might be maybe every meeting they don't have to set it up that everybody shares, but to create that opportunity. I read about one person who took their team on a walk, and he said that it allowed extroverts to kind of think and talk, but that it was relaxing for introverts. They could just sort of calm down. So I think there are lots of, interesting techniques to help both the teams work together. I think that extroverts too, because of they can also figure out how to give introverts time to talk and not perceive them as being passive because they're not speaking up right away. I think that's a part that introverts struggle with.
Right. And I think I like how you bring out the issue of, the introversion, extroversion, energy style or energy type as, another important component around teamwork, and honoring that. I believe, if you've hired the right people on your team, every voice is really critical. And if there are some people on that team who are not necessarily comfortable speaking out in the same way, a good leader needs to be able to first identify that, first to see, oh, Bob doesn't, contribute as much, and I know how smart he is and what great work he does. So what do I need to do to either facilitate Bob communicating in that environment? And I know I've been in, with teams and in groups where sometimes just by giving time, hey Bob, what do you think about this? Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share? Or in advance talking with them, hey, are you okay if I ask you to share thoughts in this setting?
Right.
And a lot of times it's, yeah, of course. It just, if they don't have to raise their hand, they may not. So it's not like, I think it's important to know, introversion is not, it's not a scarlet letter. It's not a bad thing. And you can own it and talk to your boss about it. This is my preference. This is how I'd rather communicate. Can we make this happen?
Mm-hmm.
So I got a couple other comments. Deb says, many times I have to self-talk and act as if in order to get started at work.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, Jane?
Well, I think the one thing that works really well for introverts, I know exactly what she's talking about. I have a way of talking to myself, either before I give a presentation or go to a meeting. What works really well is that she's thinking first. She's kind of reflecting and thinking, about, what either she wants to say or how she wants to initiate things. So introverts do really well when they're given time to think things through, or, advance if they're going to go to a meeting, think about some of the issues that they want to talk about, write down some notes. So as long as they can use that strength of advanced planning, they can do really well. And I don't think that extroverts have to coddle introverts. Right. And sometimes they need a gentle push. So an extrovert might say, look, we're having this meeting and I'd really like you to report on that project you're working on. So, but I know what she means about self-talk. I tell one quick story that I hate going to network events. And I get up in the morning and I hope that they canceled it because of the weather. And I put on my uniform or my costume and I go and I have a great time. And I think it's just the anticipation, and she's talking about getting up the energy to kind of interact and, take initiative. So
it's so fun. Yeah, I get that. Well, two things on that. First of all, I'm, again, the high extrovert, and I don't like networking events either. And, maybe for different reasons, but, I try to redesign those events to be something different in my head when I go to them. I think of them as differently. It's funny when she said, Deb's comment about, and then you build on thinking before they speak. I don't know if you saw, I laughed because I was like, wait, you think before you speak? You don't just talk and think at the same time? And that's how I think, is I talk it out, and I want to, talk with you. Well, so what do you think, this, that, and figure it out as I go. So that made me laugh. So I want to pause and reintroduce you, and invite anyone who's watching. If you're watching live, it is 4:30 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. If you're anywhere else in the world, you can do the translating. We'd love to get your comments, questions, thoughts. If you're an introvert, we'd love to hear what you think your superpowers are, what makes you really successful. And also, if there's challenges that you have run into, we'd like to hear what that is. And if you're a manager and have introverts on your team, we'd like to hear some things you've done to support them, to help them be more effective. So please share in the comments, whether this is live or not live. We will come back and respond, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. And our guest today, I'm speaking with Jane Finkle, and Jane is a career coach, and she's the author of, I'm trying to put your name up there, and I thought I had your book as a subtitle, but I'll give the whole title. So Jane's the author of The Introvert's Complete Career Guide, From Landing a Job to Surviving, Thriving, and Moving on Up. Again, it's a long title, but each component is really meaningful and really important as we look at a person's kind of career trajectory, and from both a work satisfaction to also leadership. So, couple questions. Let's see. Actually, I think we covered a lot of our questions in your thoughts. Can we look at those? We have a bunch of statistics that we were going to share. I'd love to get your thoughts on those. I don't know if you want me to just kind of dive into the statistics, or if you want to preface anything with the statistics.
So which one are you talking about? The leader to leader?
So it's interesting. So I'll just go.
So I think the one you're referring to is the one that they took a sample of introverts and asked them about, how they perceived their ability to move up.
Yes.
As compared to extroverts. And it turned out that 4 out of 5 introverts, which is 80%, believe that extroverts are more likely to get ahead where they were. So that's really one of the challenges when you work with introverts, to really shift the message that they're giving themselves and to other people.
Right.
I think that study was maybe 8 years ago. And I like to think that there's been more education. So when I've done presentations, I do a little poll on Zoom, and it's a little closer to 60%. So that's a little better instead of 80%.
Right. Interesting. And that, again, from a leadership standpoint, that is, if you have someone on your team thinking that they can't get ahead where they work, you're not going to retain your best talent that are introverts. And so that's really important for a manager, whether you are an introvert or an extrovert. It's irrelevant. If you're an introvert, you may be more empathic and understanding about that, but it's really important for any leader, any professional, to believe they can get ahead in their role, that they can progress, continue to grow, develop, contribute, get promotions, get more salary. if you want to retain your talent, from a leadership perspective, you need to be mindful that some of the people on your team may think that they are not valued as much, and so it's really it's the responsibility of the leaders to be conscientious about this. Here's a comment. Let's see. Bill Hyman, introverts in the workplace are often misunderstood as being aloof and insensitive.
Right.
Also, if you agree, and if you have strategies to address that perception, Jane.
Well, I think the biggest misconception or the biggest tension between extroverts and introverts is that extroverts want you to respond. They've got an idea, they're talking, they want you to respond. And so if they don't understand introverts, they perceive introverts as being passive. And also because they're not responding right away, as being aloof. Where introverts are thinking, will you please just stop talking for a moment? And so it's just really valuable to have an open dialogue about that. So I remember I worked with a very extroverted leader. She was my boss, and she would come in my office and she'd just talk nonstop. And I had to figure out how to slip away in a diplomatic way, and I might stand up and say that I needed to get a file, or I had to prepare for, a student. And I think at one point she said to me later on that because I didn't speak up enough, she thought I wasn't interested. So then we have this open discussion about extroversion and introversion. So I think it's important both for introverts to understand extroverts and for extroverts to understand introverts. And like everything, to try to have an open dialogue, so that you appreciate and understand the differences.
Right. For really good onboarding, and when you're bringing either a new employee into an organization or a new team member onto your team, regardless of introversion or extroversion, it really makes sense to understand their preferred style. How do they operate at their best? And this should be another item to discuss. How do you best like to communicate? You're important here. I want to know what you think. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, raise their hand. I was the kid, in second grade. Ooh, I want to talk. That didn't make me, better or smarter than the kid next to me who was just quiet. And so it's important to for any leader to get to know each person on their team and understand how to bring out their best. That is pure good leadership. And so introversion and extroversion needs to fit with that. Here's another interesting, kind of related to this. Janine Pratt talked about, I was told several times that I wasn't good at tooting my own horn.
Yeah, I think that's very common because introverts, because of that reserve, they tend to be modest and they have to learn how to do it. So, I think with social media, it's a gift to introverts because they can be behind the monitor on their laptop and blog or post articles or write or put a video. So I think in this day and age, it's a little easier for introverts to promote themselves. But because of that modesty, and they want to be acknowledged, but they're not always excited about being center stage. And then it gives the impression that they're not, promoting themselves. Right. But part of that is their responsibility because, again, we're working with extroverts and they have expectations. And so if you go to a staff meeting, think about something that you've done really well or some progress you're making on this initiative that you're working on that you can talk about. That 50 people are involved in this, or you've saved the company, $1 million, something like that.
Yeah.
It actually is the job of the introvert to speak out and promote themselves. And it's like everything in life. We all have to move beyond our comfort zone, but that's how we grow and, expand our horizons.
So let's how do you advise an introvert to kind of to do that expansion outside of their comfort zone? In coaching, we often look at, what does someone need to think differently and do differently. So to step out of that and to be able to communicate in that way, what any one or two quick things they should be thinking about or doing differently?
Right. I always get back to advanced planning. It sounds very simple, but if you're going to a staff meeting, beyond reporting on something, talk about the results or the outcome that was really positive. The other thing is, I think extroverts do a good job of promoting themselves by interacting a lot with the leaders, like going in their offices and getting to know them really well. And sometimes introverts shy away from that. So I think it's really important that they make and take initiative, not just with the boss, but with people that they work with. And one thing I recommend is 5 minutes a day. If you can take 5 minutes a day, now we have to do it on Zoom, but, to go into somebody's office or, say, let me check in with you on Zoom. I think, and then you'll be able to talk about what you're doing. And in a way, that's that's a way that you can promote yourself. Because some of it's just letting people know what's going on, how the project is going, and, hopefully there are good outcomes and results. But you're keeping them abreast. And that, I think, is a really important way to promote yourself.
Yeah. So I'm going to reintroduce Jane Finkle, career coach and author of the Introvert's Complete Career Guide. And we're talking today about introvert power, quiet leadership in action. So if you have questions, comments, experiences you want to share, please put them in the comments. We actually have a long comment. I don't know if it's going to fit. Oh yeah, it's good. And for some reason, the person's name isn't, so I don't know who this LinkedIn user is. So if you're there, tell me your name in another comment so I can acknowledge you. But this topic brings up some interesting. This comment brings up some interesting things that you've acknowledged this. Most organizations do operate in an extroverted way. It's interesting. The person talks about social events after hours. I know for a lot of people that's a nightmare, kind of going to, the again, pre-COVID, going to a happy hour or, some kind of social event that was work related, that sometimes that FaceTime mattered, being there, being seen, and you're noticed if you're missing. So that's something I want your thoughts on that.
So that was a lot, but
I'm going to go back to that because there's something else. There's a couple other really important things, but I didn't want to.
Right.
And the extrovert in me might ask 4 questions in a row, but I'm already learning. I just brought up one topic.
Right.
So let's talk about that kind of social events at work, and then I'll bring it back up.
Right. I think one of the challenges for introverts is that their energy gets depleted when they're on a lot, and they do have to be on a lot often at work. So now you're making them, they go through the day and they're doing their job, and then you're asking them at night, to go to a social event. And so it might be better to do it during the day or just let them go home if they want to. They can still find ways, or, if an introvert feels pressure, you don't have to stay the whole time, stay for a half hour, because introverts have to recharge. They have to regain their energy. And so if you're going all day and then you're expected to go to 2 hours to a social event, it's really challenging. So
yeah. And so that's really important, again, for a manager or an organization that is putting these, an event like this on. It's not going to be right for everybody, and making certain things required, at least always required, may not be the best approach to retain and develop your introverts, who are an integral part of your organization. They're just may not be like everyone else on your team. So I want to put that comment back up, and this is from Jeff Cohen, no relation. the other piece he talks about, leaders who can see introversion, extroversion is just another difference to be aware of, create a productive workspace for all. So this is a great technique he talks about. A key technique a leader can use is to create space for people to think and respond in the moment, and by letting people know in advance the questions that need thinking. So to acknowledge what Jeff is saying, it's great to put the agenda out in advance of an important meeting. And if there are going to be discussion topics where you want people where you want to get the input of everyone around the room, give it to them in advance. Not everyone enjoys thinking on their feet or is comfortable with that. So that's a really great strategy. Thoughts on that, Jane?
Yes. The other thing that comes to mind is that extroverted leaders might, if there's a major issue or something very important that you're working on, to actually encourage extroverts to get in a quiet space and think too. So to use some of those introverted qualities and see, if they have that time to think, they often, like introverts, can come up with really good solutions or different ways to, think about things.
Yeah, it's
balancing. It's a yin and yang.
It's interesting that you say that. Again, as a high extrovert, some of my favorite and most productive days are the days when, for just luck, I have nothing on my calendar, no meetings, no client calls, don't have to talk to someone. And then, you can't see all these piles on my desk. Then I can actually work on getting those piles down, and I feel productive as opposed to always doing something new and bouncing off other people's ideas. So I like that idea is having extroverts try on some introversion strengths and style for a change.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, this is gonna be the last call for live questions and comments. So you're watching Jane Finkle and me, Julie Cohen, talk about introvert power, quiet leadership in action. So if you do have any other questions or comments or experiences you want to share and get thoughts from us, we'd welcome those. Put those in the comments. But Jane, as we do wrap up, what are the big themes? Like the one or two, if you had just a few minutes with an introvert who wants to be successful, in his or her role, what are the one or two or three things you want to remind him or her to?
I probably, it's kind of a repetition, but it's just to be able to see what's really good about introversion and be able to incorporate it, in a really positive way, but also know that it will require you to maybe go beyond your comfort zone, try some new things out. You do have to learn to speak up and take risks. And the truth is, in some respects, introversion, if you're using extroverted skills and you're introverted, you're more balanced. So, I think in the end, it's great that you're able to use both.
Yeah, that's great. And then some of my final thoughts would be around reiterating some of the stuff we've talked around. If you're managing or leading introverts, is to have those conversations as you would with any person on your team in your organization. What helps you be your best, and make sure you talk about communication, energy, how they like to participate in meetings, how they like to share their ideas, and try to honor that, knowing that sometimes you may not be able to, but that you want to be able to be mindful of someone's introversion, extroversion style as much as you would any other preference. So so Jane, how can people reach you, or if you want to remind people of your book and where they can get that, can you let us know?
Well, I'm an introvert. I'm going to promote myself now. You can get the book on Amazon.com, on Barnes & Noble, and IndieBound, which is the independent bookstore. And my website is really easy. It's janefinkle.com. And just to say about the book is that I've covered all aspects from self-assessment to job search to onboarding and succeeding. So I really wanted to cover the whole spectrum for introverts.
That's great. Well, Jane, it was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And thanks everyone for tuning in and sharing kind of your experience as an introvert or an extrovert. Before we end, just a few things coming up. Work Life Leader Live, we have leadership chats like this throughout. We have scheduled our first Work Life Leader book group. We're going to be reading No Rules, Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention by Reed Hastings, who is the CEO of Netflix, and Erin Meyer. If you want to participate, read the book before December 3rd. That's when I'm having a conversation about this. I have one guest joining me. We're going to be talking about the book. And if you've read it and you want to be on camera with me talking about it, let me know. I'm looking for one or two other folks. And we'll be talking about the main themes of that book. And there'll also be, we have a couple other really fun leadership Work-Life Leader Lives coming up. Some talking about neuroscience and leadership, as well as the future of work. And we advertise on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So hopefully you'll tune in. And thank you again, Jane. And thanks everyone for being here. And we'll see you again on Work Life Leader Live. Take care.